Welcome to my office. We are now in the conference room of my office. My office is filled with books because I'm a lover of books. And I usually write here in the office because the presence of nowadays perhaps 13,000 books somehow focuses my mind and inspires my mind for writing. In principle, I stopped architect's design work 12 years ago, but I still feel that I'm working in architecture because I'm writing in architecture, and I'm not writing in a historian's role. I'm writing experientially as an architect's role. So in a way, my writings are verbal architecture nowadays, or have been for the last 12 years. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me in your beautiful office filled with books. Juhani, it's a pleasure to discuss daylight today. To introduce myself, I am Selma Tir, circadian neuroscientist at the University of Oxford, and I'm interested in how the modern light environment disrupts our bodies, more specifically how it affects our physiology and behavior through circadian rhythms. And I know that daylight is important for both of us in different aspects. And I guess to start, I'm interested in hearing what daylight means to you, maybe, and how that's been incorporated in your work so far.
Light, in my view, is the most subtle aspect of architecture. Everything sort of terminates and focuses on the light finally. And light is the dimension in architecture which carries most subtle emotions. And I'm very interested in the mental and psychological mediation through architecture. And my criticism of the architectural situation nowadays is that it has too often become a purely rationalized economic, technical thing. But when that happens, architecture disappears. So for me, the experiential aspect is important, that architecture exists really in its experience. Outside of that, it is something else.
And how is it that you see light as more than a visual experience, but really a place and temporal experience for your work?
I have been interested in the atmosphere of architecture for 25 years, and light is one of the most important atmospheric elements in architecture. I also have been increasingly interested in the embodied aspect of architecture. I don't think that we experience architecture primarily through the eyes. I think we experience architecture through our existential sense. We meet architecture in the existential experience of being in the world. So that is how aspects of architecture, like illumination, become part of our bodily experience.
Well, I find that fascinating because obviously I study light, how light affects our bodies, and how it's not just about the visual aspect of it, but really how it embodies time for us and through our body clocks. And I've been very conscious about how architecture has evolved and how the built environment, whether it's houses, offices, or just public places, have changed throughout time, and how the access to daylight has evolved through these changes.
Good that you mention time, because we tend to think, and people tend to think, that architecture operates in the material and spatial reality. But time is equally important in architecture. And much of the problems in today's architecture is that it does not anymore mediate between past and present and future. Architecture is increasingly in the present tense, partly because it has become so strongly guided by economic factors. We dwell in place and time, and they are equally important. And good architecture mediates those things. Good architecture makes us dwell in the past and the future at the same time, as we live in present tense.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned the economic aspect of this, because I've been thinking about the socioeconomic influence of the access to daylight. And to give a little bit of background on this, my field of study is circadian rhythms, and circadian rhythms are natural near 24-hour cycles of physiological and behavioral changes that occur in all living things. And they keep our bodies on schedule day and night by anticipating the changes in light and darkness, amongst other changes in the environment. And this access to daylight has been a measure of socioeconomic status in a way, because we used to be mostly working outdoors, outside, doing agriculture for most people. And that meant that we had...
I spent my youth at my former grandfather's farm, so
there you go.
I know exactly what you are saying.
You can relate.
Sorry.
But I'm assuming that your daily life changed from those moments when you were outside working on the farm.
Yes.
And I'm assuming now mostly indoors in an office like this one. And the amount of light that we're exposed to during the day between outside and inside is drastically different.
Yes.
And that is one of the pains, I think, of this 21st century, because we're not exposed to enough light during the day, and we need to either be exposed to a lot more light or to be able to go outdoors. And I think not everyone has the luxury or the time to be able to go outdoors and be exposed to natural daylight. How do you see that in architecture? I mean, we mentioned a little bit about how some buildings for certain socioeconomic groups had more light than others. An interesting fact, I think,
there was, at least in Finland, there was in the 19th century, there was a special tax on the size of windows.
There you go.
So it was, natural light was taxed.
There you go. The access to light was a privilege.
Yes.
Access to natural light. Well, thankfully, I believe that has evolved. I believe the regulations are different now, or at least I hope. Well, do you feel like these regulations now still somehow restrict your artistic freedom and your vision and what you want to construct?
Yes, but let me go back to this text, light. There is a old peasant house, interior log house, black, because it was a chimneyless log house in the National Museum with the really small windows. When I go to that room, I get tears. It's so beautiful, the black interior, and then small windows which are like diamonds, bright diamonds. And it is so much about home. I just can't hold my emotions in such a place. And I often compare that experience with today's houses, which, as you say, have as huge windows as possible. I think light is something that the quantity of it and the quality of it has to be controlled specifically. Light needs to be poeticized. It's not a quantity, it's primarily a quality, experiential quality.
Well, I agree with you there. When circadian researchers think about light, I would say that we think about four things. There's the quantity, the brightness, that's one you mentioned. There's actually the duration of light, so how long are we being exposed to light? Then there's the composition, the quality, the colors, the wavelength of the light, and finally the timing. How I'm assuming the placements of different windows will allow you to have morning light versus evening light, to be able to see sunrise versus sunset, or just the nadir at noon. And that's quite fascinating how that can impact our functions.
I feel light as a tactile experience. For me, the tactile experience is perhaps the most important sense, simply because it is our original sense for a child in the womb. And I think that in emotional experiences, the tactile sense and sense of nearness sort of takes over. So when I have designed houses or any buildings, I have thought of the tactility of light, and the tactile experience comes when light hits something, a wall, a floor, or our eyes. So the tactile experience somehow, well, I would say that in an emotive experience, all the senses fuse together, and that is a kind of an existential encounter. For we usually tend to think of encountering architecture through the eyes, but first through eyes, but then finally through our being. And that is why in my essays of the last 15 or 20 years I have always used the notion of existential. We encounter or meet the world through our existential sense.
I can see that. And would you say that we react differently to different types of light? And by different types, I mean sunlight versus artificial light versus candles, fires?
For me, electric light has the least character. For instance, compared with candlelight, which is really emotive. It's almost like another person would be in the same room with you. And I think it's one of the skills of a good designer or architect is to bring life to light instead of being just a commodity which you don't pay any attention to, which is usually the case in offices. And for me, a rhythm is very important in illumination. And particularly in working spaces nowadays, there is no rhythm of light. There is just constant illumination.
Yes, that is very true. And I mean, it's been shown that these rhythms are extremely important to be able to detect dawn-dusk transitions for humans is very important. It's not just light and darkness per se. There are variations to it.
Yes.
Variation in the quality of light, of how it makes us feel, related to what you were saying.
Yes.
And buildings who can capture those rhythms, I think, are really capturing the essence of what we should be going through every day.
There is also a tendency, or has been for a few decades, to have too much light. The quantity of light is meaningful also. And a sense of intimacy is experienced immediately with candlelight. It's a live light that somehow exists in the world in the same way as you, as a living person, whereas electric light needs certain things like these fine Paul Henningsen light fixtures where the light plays, it's being cast around in order to create that feeling of life, which with the bulb alone would not be that way. And that also applies to an entire architectural building, that building needs to collaborate with light coming from all directions and give them different meanings.
Absolutely.
In architecture and as in all arts, the emotional articulation is very important.
And you were mentioning too much light. Now I'm interested because I think there might not be such thing as too much light during the day, but there definitely is too much light in the evening or at night. Is that something that you've thought about, or the differences between day and night experiences within a living space?
That's one thing, surely, but then also there are different life situations which should somehow be reflected in the quantity of light. For instance, I cannot write in a too high light because I need that psychological solitude, and the bright light breaks that, eliminates that solitude. So what I'm suggesting here is sensitivity also to the character of light, its temperature, but also its quantity.
Absolutely. As a general rule of thumb, circadian neuroscientists would recommend as much light as possible during the day, and then really as little as possible in the evening and in the night. And very often people will ask for specific measures, which is understandable. But I think going back towards a personal experience of light, a personal sensitivity to light is very important, and how it's not one size fits all. A bright light might be not so bright for me, but very bright for you. And you, as you mentioned, you might need a much dimmer environment to be able to be productive, whereas I might need a very bright one. And I think it's very important that people get in touch. We were saying it's these emotions, the emotions that come with light, the comfort.
But we tend to give a secondary value to emotions. You probably know in neuroscience has revealed that every single thought begins with a emotive charge. So emotions are right there in all our acts. And as a designer of places, I should need to be sensitive to those things. So light is not just light; it's articulated light.
Absolutely.
I'm usually introduced as a theoretician of architecture. I'm not a theoretician at all. I don't theorize anything. I just report on what I experience, what I see, and what I understand. That's completely different. And also, when I stopped working as a an active architect 15 years ago and started to write intensely, I didn't feel that I changed my profession. I'm still not a writer. I'm still an architect, but I'm now writing architecture rather than designing it. And I can say so because I write on experiences and emotions, and which is rather close to seeing or occupying architecture. In design work, I use facts revealed by science, of course, but I can't use them as I would use a pen, pencil, or a knife, or an axe. I have to internalize them. I have to internalize them so that they become my instinctual way of experiencing and seeing, hearing things. That's, I think, an important point that for an artist, as I consider an architect's work also, has to work with things that she or he has internalized, that have become part of the artist's way of being in this world. And that's not always easy to internalize a scientific formulation. You have to get it so close that it becomes part of you. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes. So would you say that you start with some quantifiable measures and that's what you internalize? How would you
Yes, and then I gradually internalize them. They become my way of looking at things.
And that is through the senses, as you mentioned, would you say?
Yes, but that's partly, I would almost say, my way of existence, because I have always had friends among writers, poets, painters, sculptors, philosophers, what have you. And so I cannot acknowledge boundaries at all. And science goes to this same category. I have had so many important scientists, including neuroscience. I don't understand much of neuroscience, but I know its potential for my profession. And I have been trying to mediate that potential to other people.
Absolutely. And how do you see this potential unraveling? What can we do for your profession? What are the insights that we can bring as scientists?
Have conversations like this, or private conversations. That's how I have always worked. I'm now going to have on Saturday a conversation with a Finnish film director and a writer on silence. He's not a scientist, but as a film director, writer, he understands the meaning of silence. So, and we are going to speak about the meaning of silence. And there I will probably again suggest that silence is fundamentally a sensation of the skin. It's not through hearing, it's through our being in a silent place that we appreciate it. I just mentioned this, that for me, internalization of sciences or other fields has very much happened through friendships rather than deliberate conceptual studies. And I've written a couple of essays on the importance of friendships. I think very, how would I say, sincerely, that good friends are the best things you can have in your life. Good friends travel for you, they read for you, they think for you.
I agree with that. Absolutely. And I think scientists can learn a lot from architects like yourself and other people in artistic fields. You've written a lot about atmosphere, and that's something that I've been very interested in translating, but it's been quite challenging. How do you mimic or reproduce the atmosphere of light, the feelings that it can evoke in people in a lab setting? I mean, I've been interested in, especially in the difference between artificial light and candlelight, because just like yourself, candlelight soothes me. It's something that I like to have after 10 p.m. It's candlelight at home only. But while this is our emotional response to it, I work with animal models, with mice, and I don't think that mice would react the same being next to a candle. I think they would feel it more as a fear factor. And also, it probably wouldn't get approved by our home office having candles in the lab and doing experiments in that way. But I would love to be able to mimic the differences between being exposed to artificial light versus candlelight in the evening, and how that affects our bodies differently, whether it's our sleep or concentration, learning and memory. And that is a challenge that I haven't solved yet, but I often think about it.
Well, you know that Gaston Bachelard has a wonderful sentence: light in the window is a waiting light. And I will always, when I remember that sentence, I think of my own childhood when I would be skiing in winter in the darkness, and it would be really cold, and I would begin to think of home, and then I would see the light in the window somewhere in the distance, and how it would start to warm my heart already there. It is a good example of how light or physical things can mediate emotive messages. And this is a very important, essential part of a designer's talent, is to have sensitivity to the emotive messages of things. Sizes of rooms, illumination, but everything, colors have powerful emotional influences. That is why it is important to study architecture as experiences, not as technical drawings. I always try to activate my students' childhood memories. My first exercise was always based on a childhood memory. Somehow get these the factors that an architect deals with internalized as part of one's own story.
You taught in Finland, but also abroad?
Everywhere.
Everywhere, exactly. Yeah. Demographics, obviously people's backgrounds is also very important in how they perceive light, in either the emotional experience or just the bodily function linked to that exposure. Has it been different for you to imagine built environments in Finland versus in other places? And I'm saying this because it's December as we film, and there's not so much light. Today is a beautiful day, we're very lucky. But I've heard from Finnish people that there's not that much light in the winter. Do you feel like then daylight has been even more of a theme in the buildings that you've built here versus abroad?
Well, in the reality of architects' work, these things are very little discussed. Either you understand them and they are part of your way of looking at things and working. Well, maybe every now and then with a private client, that would become a matter of conversation. But even when I have designed art museums where light is essential, the curators are not usually too sensitive to the qualities of light. Usually the decisions have been my decisions rather than the clients.
You've had quite a lot of artistic freedom, it seems. Do you still feel the weight of the regulations that are
Yes.
set in different places?
The whole profession will be killed by regulations. And I would hope that there would be another way of mediating these fundamental observations and understandings than regulations. Regulations are anti-creative in many ways, against the freedom of feeling and thought.
Well, it's very interesting how some regulations are put in place. We have a lot of discourse around noise pollution, for example, or other types of pollution that
Yes.
people are exposed to.
Yes.
And light pollution has not been at the forefront of the discussion so
Yes.
far, and I think it will be the
Yes.
next
Yes.
big thing.
Yes. Yes.
Because we do need a lot of light during the day. But then in some cities, we can talk big cities like New York, light pollution is a big thing. When you have windows with lights outside that never turn off during the night, and you need proper blinds, proper tools to make sure that you're blocking all the light at night.
Yes.
Light pollution is important and really should be
Surely,
considered nowadays.
surely. It's interesting to compare light pollution and sound pollution. Also, in both cases, at least I experience them as pain, as physical pain. My eyes start to ache, and also my ears begin to ache.
The lived experiences of this
Yes,
pollution.
yes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What I find also very interesting these days is that the central focus around light, and how nowadays there's been a discourse around the negative effects of light, which I think have mainly been wrongly advised. We hear a lot of talk about blue light, for example, blue light at night and blue blocking glasses,
Yeah.
when the evidence against blue light is very limited and controversial, if I may say. And as you mentioned, light can be a lived experience, and the temperature of the light also
Yes.
brings a lot of different emotions in people. How do you see the different temperatures of light affecting us, more from an artistic, lived point of view?
Simply probably because of the natural unconscious association with tactile skin sensations. Warm light gives a sense of intimacy, whereas cold light mediates distance and coldness as a human relationship also. We think too little of the emotional dimensions of experiences. But as you certainly know, the neuroscientists have argued or shown that every activity begins with an emotive charge. The emotion comes first, simply because as animals we were saved by our emotions rather than intellect. In I have become very interested in human evolution in the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we do not know who we are. We can say that bluntly. We don't understand our own evolution. And for instance, the fact that we have more DNA, bacterial DNA in our stomachs than human DNA should, stop people to think a little bit about what we really are.
Yes. Well, evolution is very interesting in respect to light. We've mentioned how light exposure has changed when people were mostly doing agriculture during the day versus now when we work in offices. Yes. Another aspect of evolution has been the use of light emitting devices.
Yes.
We're not just using light to allow us to have activities in the evening, to be able to write in an office that's quite dark otherwise, or to cook at night, to do many things. Now the use of smartphones and laptops and iPads has changed also the meaning of light.
Yes.
It's not just the alerting effects of the light itself, but also the content, I think, that is associated with light. Some people believe that really it's the light from the smartphones and the laptops that keep us awake at night, but
there's also an aspect that has very little been spoken about, is the loss of a sense of place. Earlier, knowledge was always placed, and in my library all knowledge is placed, and that is why I love to work here, because I'm moving from one place to the other. And so it's an almost physical experience, concrete experience. And in today's world, information is too much unplaced, displaced, which in a way makes certain things faster, but then completely eliminates other things, like the same applies to time, that we absurdly have a measure of time which is 1 second, or sometimes even less, whereas our real time is measured by old time clocks, because that's the speed that we need. We don't need this speed of seconds. And it is our technology that has made the change. For instance, the minutes appeared on public clocks after railways were introduced, simply because people needed to know time by 1 minute precision. Earlier, not. It didn't matter. In the ancient ancient Greeks, even 1 hour was sufficient measure for time. I'm just saying that we are going through rather decisive changes without noticing how we are being changed by our own inventions. Mm-hmm. This also applies to light, that we have sources of light which probably you know much better, probably are not good for our eyes.
Yes. Yes. Our sense of time has definitely been changed with the introduction of artificial light. Yes. And the expansion of our daytimes into the evening. Yes. And that sense of time has also been distorted by, we've mentioned light pollution. There's also jet lag, I think people travel a lot these days for work. I, just traveled to Finland. So when we go through jet lag, this emotional response to light might also be distorted or disrupted. And it's interesting that jet lag does not only occur when we travel, but we have this, what we call social jet lag. So even a difference in the rhythms that people have between the work days, Monday to Friday, and then the weekends, Saturday, Sunday. These changes of rhythms and, as you were mentioning, the concept of place and time going from office to the home.
Yes.
Those emotional responses are being affected as well.
I think it would be proper to say that our technologized culture breaks and eliminates natural rhythms on all fronts. And which certainly you know better than I, will have biological consequences. So.
Absolutely. Implications of this artificial light has really many knock-on effects. Circadian rhythms are daily rhythms that impact all of our bodily processes, and whether that's learning and memory, concentration, sleep-wake cycles, but also we're talking about the stomach, metabolism and other functions. And seeing light as just a tool to operate better in the dark, I think, is not the right way to think about it. So we've mentioned the emotional response to light, and then there's the health implications. And one population that is really suffering from this lack of concern towards light is shift workers. Shift workers, people who work at night and who have to be completely delayed, either continuously, so they always work the night shift, or people who have shifts that change continuously. So one time they'll be on the evening shift versus the morning shift, and they can never really set their clock to the outside environment. And this synchrony between the internal body, the internal clock, and the outside environment is really at the core of then many adverse health effects, which is something that circadian rhythm scientists are really trying to advocate for and ring the bell on the dangers of shift workers. Whether that's nurses, doctors, firefighters, people working in different like mining industry and other fields.
Do you know what these pink triangles in the corner of our eyes are?
No.
The scientific name is plica semilunaris, and they are the spots in which our horizontally moving extra eyelids were fixed when we were lizards in the Saurian age. I tell this often to my students so that they would understand that we are biological beings and we have a long biological history which we tend to forget. But it's almost shocking to know that our lizard face is right there, exhibited. There are certainly many aspects of human evolution which are echoed in our relationship with light and reactions to light also. But unfortunately, regrettably, our societies are developing to the direction that things become more unnatural, against the naturality of things. And everything becomes sort of artificially timed and well, you are doing important work in this respect.
And so are you. So how can we bring our insights together then to maybe come back to more naturally built environments? Is that through the materials? Is that through the way we design the buildings?
Well, I think one problem in today's society and education is that we are taught, how would I say, isolated things, isolated findings of sciences. We should be more interested in how in the processes of integration, and only an integrated knowledge is useful in an architect's work. Probably applies to any kind of work. But consciousness tends to break into millions of bits of information, and this is where I think the problem of expertise also emerges. I am just finalizing an essay which is juxtaposing wisdom and expertise. I don't think we need much more expertise, we need wisdom. And wisdom is always deals with or combined with honesty and modesty, whereas expertise, as the experts are presented on television, they appear to be a bit arrogant always. So I support the appreciation of modesty in education.
I think it's clear to say that we still have a lot to learn about daylight, both in science and in architecture, and finding ways to bridge the two, to bring to people spaces that are evoking positive emotional responses and lived experiences, but also healthy living spaces that support our bodily functions and our circadian rhythms and all the other processes. And I really hope that it's conversations like these that just point out to some areas of interest that we should talk about, converse, and build bridges on how to best work about it.
Yes, and surprising things emerge. I have had several conversations now here in my library with a young Finnish philosopher who wrote his doctoral thesis on the phenomenology of breathing. It's almost shocking that phenomenological philosophy has so far started with senses, sensory experience. But of course, breathing comes first. So it's interesting that discussions like this might reveal something that nobody has thought about so far. We speak with this philosopher here about the importance of breathing.
In that way, do you think that maybe other types of profiles should be invited in these conversations where we talked about science and architecture? Philosophy also seems to be important.
Philosophy is important, but so is poetry. I read poetry books, even more than philosophy books. No, I support all kinds of interactions, and I try to encourage my students to make friends with individuals and students in completely different areas. It is this cross illumination of things, which is so important. But in the society of expertise, things tend to be split into various, areas of expertise. My conversations with members of in this Daylight Award jury with the scientists have been very revealing. I have almost always noticed that the finer a person is in his own rather often limited area, the more you can learn from him, the more also open the person is to, explore and expose his or her knowledge.
We definitely have a lot to learn from each other, and I think the advice of making friends with people in different fields is one of the most valuable I've also received very early on. You can always be inspired by people who do different things, and
Yes.
it's very strange and also beautiful the ways that people can inspire you in your own work,
Yes.
and how discussing different topics from different angles and different perspective, whether
Yes.
it's scientific angle or poetry, for example. So maybe we need a collage of poetry about daylight, but also scientific facts and quantifiable ways, but also internalized maybe ways to experience daylight. And through that approach, we'd then be able to get a holistic understanding of what
Yes.
daylight means to us.
Daylight is such a poetic, fundamental thing that there is a lot of beautiful poetry about daylight.
Well, I shall explore in your library then after and find those beautiful poems.